Thank you for joining us for this pre-recorded webinar on eating disorders during pregnancy and early parenthood, a guide for carers. We are so grateful to have been included in F.E.A.S.T Feast of Knowledge program for 2020 and support their mission to support caregivers of loved ones suffering from eating disorders. My name is Olivia Donati-Beach and I'm presenting today in conjunction with Rebecca Lister. We are both affiliated with Eating Disorders Victoria, and it is through this organisation that we present to you today. I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are presenting. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and the Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be viewing today. I also want to acknowledge that we respect and welcome diversity of culture, religion, gender and sexuality, and that we acknowledge all people who have been affected by eating disorders and mental illness, either themselves or as a carer. The voice of lived experience is essential in the development of our services and advocacy. I have been interning with the education team at EDV for the last 10 months, primarily working on education and awareness projects around eating disorders and disordered eating during pregnancy and early parenthood. I took up this position after completing my honours thesis looking at disordered eating in postpartum women. I also volunteer on the Hub, providing information and peer support for people experiencing eating disorders or for those who are supporting them. In addition, I come to this field with lived experience and I'm a mother of one with another on the way.
Hi, my name's Rebecca Lister. I'm the Education Manager at Eating Disorders Victoria. It's a real pleasure to be with you today.
Eating Disorders Victoria is a government-funded not-for-profit that provides support to those who have been affected by eating disorders. We do this in many ways, including a free and confidential hub service that provides information and peer support for people experiencing eating disorders or for those who are supporting them. Clinical services such as psychology and dietetics, peer support groups, plus education programs and advocacy. EDV has been around for over 35 years and we welcome all people to access our services as we believe that everyone has the right to evidence-based treatment. Our vision is for a future where the incidence, duration and impacts of all eating disorders are reduced and ultimately eradicated. We have 45 minutes with you today and during this time we'll cover quite a lot. The presentation has been split into two parts. In part one, we will run through a quick overview of eating disorders in pregnancy and early parenthood, including facts and figures, risk factors, common triggers, health risks, and signs, symptoms, and complications. We feel it is important to cover off these basics before we really get stuck into your role as a carer. We will then move on to part two, which covers caring for someone with an eating disorder during this period. We'll talk about considerations and possible challenges that may be experienced by the pregnant or expectant parent during this period, as well as providing practical guidance as to how you can support that individual, the importance of understanding your role and defining it, and then we'll leave you with some valuable resources and support options that you may wish to seek out. It is difficult to get consensus on prevalence estimates for eating disorders in Australia. However, it is estimated that around 1 million Australians have an eating disorder at any one time. Of these, 64% are women, and 15% of Australian women will experience an eating disorder at some point in their life. It is a widely held belief that the actual prevalence of eating disorders is significantly underestimated, and these statistics may not accurately represent prevalence rates. They also don't consider non-clinical eating disorders such as disordered eating, which is incredibly problematic and is a key behavioural risk factor in the development of eating disorders. So eating disorders occur in a significant number of women across the perinatal period. Estimates suggest approximately 4% of women who are pregnant have a recent or past eating disorder, and this is mainly bulimia nervosa. It is estimated that approximately 7.5% of pregnant women meet the criteria for an active eating disorder. And during the perinatal period, approximately 27% of women display psychological and behavioural features associated with an eating disorder, despite no clinical diagnosis. Eating disorders can develop as a result of pregnancy, and this is likely due to physiological and psychological changes, or they can develop or exist prior to the pregnancy, with the pregnancy further complicating symptoms and impacting health. It is really important to remember that eating disorders in pregnancy and early parenthood are incredibly dangerous for both mother and child and can affect both mental and physical well-being. For the majority of women with pre-existing eating disorders, symptoms improve during pregnancy. This is likely to be from a renewed focus on their health and well-being and the acceptance of the need for good nutrition and a changing body during this period. However, for some women, particularly those with either subclinical or binge eating disorders, they are at risk for an escalation of pathologic behaviours, putting both mother and fetus at risk for negative birth outcomes. Even if the eating disorder has gone away during the pregnancy, it is important to understand that it may re-emerge or remain once the baby is born. If an expectant parent experiences eating disorder symptoms and body dissatisfaction during pregnancy, they may continue to experience them once the baby is born, or the birth of the child may signal the end of their symptoms. For other new parents, they may begin to experience issues after the birth of the child. This may be influenced by a parent's unrealistic expectations of their postnatal body and of the time that it should take to return to pre-pregnancy size and shape. This can be influenced by cultural representations or society pressure, with limited consideration of the dramatic physical, physiological, and psychological changes that take place during this period. The health and nutrition of the mother and her baby is paramount, and professional help should be sought if there are any concerns or issues suspected. Women who place emphasis on avoiding weight gain or a changing body shape during pregnancy, or who focus on intensive exercise in the early months following childbirth, place themselves and their babies at additional health risks. Women should be encouraged to embrace any changes to their body as natural and healthy. It is important to remember that when it comes to pregnancy and childbirth, there is no normal in terms of expectations to return to or become a particular size or shape before, during, or after the pregnancy and early parenthood period. As a carer and support, this is something that you can help instill in the expectant or new parent.
Thanks, Olivia. Often people who've been affected by eating disorders, they try to look to understand what is happening, and sometimes they blame themselves for something that they think they might have done or haven't done. It's important to realise that it's not the person's fault and it's not your fault. Eating disorders are serious mental illnesses, and like other psychiatric and health conditions, the development of an eating disorder is likely to involve a combination of factors, including, as you'll see from the slide, genetic, behavioural, psychological and socio-cultural. We're going to have a look at those in a moment. Genetic risks are the neurobiological makeup of people, and more recent research has demonstrated that there can be a strong genetic component involved in eating disorders. Behavioural factors might include disordered eating and dieting. It's really important to understand that disordered eating behaviours, and in particular dieting, are the most common behavioural indicators of developing an eating disorder. Psychological risk factors include things like stress, perfectionism, low self-esteem, and depression. When we talk about sociocultural influences, we're talking about things like an internalisation of the Western body ideal and peer pressure to look a certain way. We'll go into these in more detail as we move on with the upcoming slides. So, genetic or biological factors. In addition to things like genetic predisposition, scientists are currently researching the biochemical and biological factors and their role in developing an eating disorder. Research has indicated that in some people with eating disorders, there's an imbalance of certain chemicals in the brain. Genetic or family factors, for example, a person who's exposed to a parent or a sibling with an eating disorder, means that they could be at a higher risk of developing an eating disorder themselves. Research also suggests that this is due to a genetic predisposition rather than completely learned behaviour. The perinatal period and the associated physical, psychological and hormonal changes can be a big biological factor that might place expecting and new parents at a greater risk of developing an eating disorder. Behavioural factors. This one can be quite confronting for people, but dieting is actually the number one behavioural risk in the development of an eating disorder. So by that, we're not saying that dieting is the number one reason. We're saying it's the number one behavioural risk factor. Recent research has shown that women who diet severely are 18 times more likely to develop an eating disorder. Women who diet moderately are 6 times more likely to develop an eating disorder. 95% of diets fail. They're not realistic and they're not sustainable. They also don't work. At least two-thirds of people who diet regain more weight than they lost within the first 5 years. So dieting is something that we really need to look at. So let's break it down more and talk about our new parents dieting. Dieting, unfortunately, has become quite normalised in our society. However, that doesn't lessen the risks and the poor health and well-being outcomes that come with it. New parents are particularly at risk an at-risk group in engaging in dieting. This is likely due to a combination of dramatic body changes that occur during the perinatal period, the media's increasing sexualisation of mothers, think about the term yummy mummy, and perceived socio-cultural pressures on mothers' appearance. For example, the perceived pressure on women to regain their baby body quickly post-birth. With this in mind, it's no surprise that there's such a high percentage, around 75% of women are concerned about weight in the first weeks after childbirth, and 70% of new mothers are dieting to lose weight within the first 4 months postpartum. But it is important to remember that we have a role in fighting to reduce this figure. It's critical that women understand that their size and weight doesn't define them, and that dieting can be incredibly damaging for both their mental and physical well-being, with specific implications during the postpartum period. Psychological factors. Now, you'll see all of these psychological factors there up on the screen, so I'll just go through them. So one of the factors can be black and white thinking, where people just divide things into right or wrong, this or that. There's no movement for exploration or fluidity between thoughts. Black and white thinking. Psychological factors can be when people become very obsessed with achievement. They become very achievement-oriented. They become perfectionists about everything. Hypersensitivity, particularly in relation to fear of judgment. When people have a difficulty expressing emotions and feelings, how they feel, discussing what's going on for them. Low self-esteem, a need to control certain situations. We see this particularly in relation to food and eating. A need to please others, which can be very difficult during that early postpartum period, early parenthood, and a stressful life event. And for some people, having a child can be an incredibly stressful life event. Often achievement-oriented and perfectionism can be seen as a good trait, but it needs to be tempered with other things in individuals' life. If a person feels that they don't have other things in life to succeed in, they may use food and controlling it as a way of success. So sociocultural risk factors, this refers to external or environmental occurrences that may have an impact on how someone perceives their body image. These messages are often delivered from platforms like television or film, social media. We know there's a huge impact of social media, magazines, advertising. However, sociocultural influences can also relate to situations that involve peers or friends or families, teachers, sports coaches, etc., and other figures of authority or influence. There's a strong internalised, very narrow concept of beauty in contemporary Western society, which focuses on thinness, leanness, particular style of masculinity, muscularity. And there's a huge societal pressure to achieve this. And this is part of this sociocultural risk factor. We see it in involvement with people in the sports industry with an emphasis on thin body, things like ballet dancers, gymnasts, models, athletes, peer pressure, teasing or bullying, or even when somebody is very troubled in relation to their personal relationships or their family. So these are all factors that can impact on somebody developing an eating disorder. And of course, we've got contributors to body dissatisfaction, which can lead to eating disorders and disordered eating. So particularly in the pregnancy period, when someone's body is changing, when someone's physical shape is changing quite dramatically, that can be very difficult for some people to really understand and appreciate or accept. And also in the postpartum period, when it takes longer for the body to come to its new shape. It may not be its old shape, it may be a new shape. Lots of people's bodies change after they've had a baby. So it's important that we support people to feel comfortable during this. Other contributors to body factor, to body dissatisfaction are things like low self-esteem or lack of self-acceptance, a depressive mood, a need for external approvals or approval from other people. As we've said earlier, the internalisation of the thin or very narrow appearance ideal that exists in contemporary society. Higher body comparison tendency, so people comparing themselves. We know that things like social media really play into that. Cultural and ethnic subcultural groups, particular ways that people perceive bodies, media, peer and family pressure, body size, and with that weight teasing. If somebody is in a larger body or if someone's in a smaller body, the teasing that goes on with that. So let's look at sort of what this actually means. What's this about, and why is it important to talk about it in relation to pregnancy and postpartum? So we know that there are multiple risk factors for the development of an eating disorder, and it can be important to understand what can trigger these symptoms. It might be an episode of illness, it might be a re-emergence of an eating disorder during a specific period such as pregnancy or postpartum. So eating disorders are often precipitated by big things that happen in someone's life, such as a change in environment or a life crisis like a death, or a stressful situation like a new baby, or a threat to self-esteem, which might be a big adjustment. They can also develop with an accumulation of minor stresses. So an example of vulnerabilities may be a history of mental illness in the family, or an imbalance in serotonin. Examples of stresses during pregnancy might be adjusting to life at home with a new baby, or a perceived sociocultural pressure to lose weight, the weight gained during pregnancy. So you've got vulnerabilities and you've got stresses. So it might be more helpful if you imagine your mental health is like a bucket, and your vulnerabilities and stresses are like balls. With each vulnerability or stress that you experience at once, the bucket will fill a little bit more. When the bucket overflows, you become unwell because you may find it more difficult to manage or cope after your bucket is overflowing. So let's have a look at this example that we've got up here. So take these two new parents here. So we have Kelly and we have Amira. So Kelly's only vulnerability is a serotonin imbalance, whereas Amira has a family history of mental illness, depression and eating disorders, as well as serotonin imbalance. So both of these women's vulnerabilities alone don't make their buckets overflow. In other words, vulnerabilities are usually not enough to cause us to become well. However, in the first few months of postpartum, both Kelly and Amira experience a variety of stresses. So Kelly has a relationship stressor, some family issues, she's sleep deprived and she's struggling with adjusting to her new identity away from paid work. And Amira experiences the exact same stresses, but she feels the socio-cultural pressure to be thin. So you'll see that Amira's bucket is starting to overflow. When these vulnerabilities and stresses add together, they can cause us to become unwell, as seen in Amira's overflowing bucket. The impact of the psychological, interpersonal, social and biological factors mentioned earlier intensify this feeling. The person may respond to these emotions by dieting in an effort to enhance their sense of self-control and self-worth. They may begin to see dieting as the only area in their life in which they can form any kind of control, and they may use it as a means of forming a fragile self-identity.
So we know that there are health risks to parent and baby, and we've covered off risk factors and some common triggers. So we'll run through these health risks now. So research has demonstrated that there are a range of risks, and I won't go through them all, but they're up on the screen for you to read through. But for example, antenatal and postnatal depression and anxiety, gestational diabetes, unplanned cesareans. And here are some more, which include an increased risk of miscarriage, increased risk of nutritional deficiency for the baby when the parent is transitioning from breast or bottle feeding to introducing solids. So there are these really important health risks, and it's important to know that they exist for both the parent and the baby. As a carer, you are uniquely placed to be aware of the signs and symptoms of eating disorders, and this is largely due to the close proximity that you have to the person who may be suffering. It's also important to remember that in expectant parents, eating disorder signs and symptoms can manifest as normal symptoms of the pregnancy. So, for example, tiredness, or they can be disguised by other expected ailments associated with the pregnancy. For example, signs of vomiting might be mistaken for morning sickness rather than self-induced purging. So as someone close to the person, you need to exercise your judgment in what may be normal. It is also important to understand that often people with eating disorders go to great lengths to hide their behaviours. So it can help to accompany the pregnant person or new parent to care appointments at the hospital or with maternal health nurses to discuss things that might be going on. So your partner might be pregnant and vomiting several times a day, and it's really important that the care provider is made aware of this. It could be a symptom of pregnancy, or it could be self-induced purging. This will just help everyone manage the situation and ensure the health of the mother and baby is looked after. So eating disorders can lead to a range of serious medical complications in pregnant women. Again, I won't list these out individually, but please take a moment to take these in. And again, here are some more. So one predictor of eating disorders in the postnatal period is a history of eating disorders prior to pregnancy or during pregnancy. So if your loved one has suffered prior to pregnancy or during, it is recommended that they have a care team to support them during the postpartum months. It is also important to understand that eating disorders during this period can lead to or be complicated by many other things. And again, I won't go through them all in detail, but things like postnatal depression, a strong focus on pre-baby shape or returning to the body shape. There might be irregular weight gain in the infant, or signs of malnutrition or undernutrition in both the mother or infant. So what may accompany an eating disorder? Unfortunately, an eating disorder can develop alongside other mental health issues. Negative feelings and low self-esteem are common symptoms for eating disorders and other mental health problems, such as depression, anxiety, and personality disorders. This can be particularly challenging in the perinatal period, both for the individual and anyone caring for them. In terms of statistics, a report on the cost of perinatal depression in Australia, compiled by Deloitte in 2012, found that up to 1 in 10 women and 1 in 20 men struggle with antenatal depression, and more than 1 in 7 mums and up to 1 in 10 dads experience postnatal depression each year in Australia. Anxiety is just as common, and many parents will experience both anxiety and depression at the same time. So PANDA, which is the Perinatal Anxiety and Depression Australia organisation, support individuals and families to recover from perinatal anxiety and depression. They have some great resources which we'll link to at the end of this presentation. So we will now move on to part 2, which covers caring for someone with an eating disorder in pregnancy and/or early parenthood in a really practical way. Before we get stuck into it though, I think it's really important to consider this sentence. If you don't look after yourself, you won't be able to look after anyone else. We aren't going to touch on this in a huge way during this presentation, but it is Carers 101. In the context of pregnancy and early parenthood, it is particularly interesting to consider, both for yourself as a carer, whether that be as a partner, parent, friend, but also for the expecting or new parent to consider in their new role as a parent. We understand that it can be incredibly difficult to put yourself first and make yourself the focus, especially when you can see that someone you care for is mentally and physically unwell. But it is the only way that you will be able to support and maintain your own health and well-being whilst providing the support that your loved one needs and deserves. It's the same for the expecting or new parent. They must address their own well-being so that they can provide their offspring with what they need and deserve. When we talk about eating disorders in pregnancy and early parenthood, there are a range of considerations and possible challenges to think about. It is really important to understand the individual influence that these may have, but also the cumulative effect, which you can think of in a similar way to the bucket analogy that Rebecca used earlier. For people currently experiencing an eating disorder during this period, there may be certain times or events that trigger more severe behaviours and thoughts. And for those who have recovered or who are recovering, they may experience patches of feeling a little more wobbly than usual, or may potentially relapse. Speaking from my own experience, I had an eating disorder for around 10 years before I started my journey to recovery with the primary motivating factor of getting pregnant. When I did fall pregnant, I considered myself recovered and felt great, probably the best I'd felt my whole life. I was so proud of myself and my body and didn't engage in any eating disorder behaviours or thoughts. However, I was challenged in the postpartum months, which caught me a little off guard. Whilst I didn't engage in any eating disorder behaviours, I did have to manage some wobbly patches where I was having eating disorder thoughts. There were multiple factors that contributed, but I would say that I was influenced by most of these dot points in some way. So I'll run through them now. It's no surprise that this period can be emotionally challenging. Whether the pregnancy was planned or unplanned, it's natural that people might have mixed emotions about it. There may be excitement, worry, happiness, sadness, and this could, flick back and forth. Pregnancy hormones such as estrogen and progesterone can contribute to giving women this mix of emotional highs and lows, especially in the first 3 months of pregnancy. And these emotions and hormones can continue to influence how an individual feels after the baby is born. It's also important to consider that pregnancy changes a woman's body, which can also affect how they feel. So some women love the physical experience of being pregnant and feel really strong and positive. Others don't enjoy pregnancy or don't like the way they look and feel. So some women may have concerns about how much weight they're putting on and how long it'll take to lose it. And this can be particularly hard for women who have body image issues or subscribe and internalise that really narrow appearance ideal, which we've discussed, that thin body. Other women may feel sick or tired, which can affect their mood and make them just generally not feel like themselves. It's important that you consider how your loved one might be speaking to themselves or judging themselves. Too often, women are very hard on themselves and hold themselves to ridiculously high and unattainable standards. This isn't helped when they are constantly bombarded with seemingly perfect images of happy, healthy women having the time of their lives during pregnancy and losing all their baby weight in just weeks. And this is often the way that some women are depicted through media and on social media. It's important to realise that the reality is often very different. So not everyone does enjoy how pregnancy and parenthood affects their body and makes them feel. Many people, from the postman to well-meaning friends and family, may openly comment on a pregnant or new mother's body. This can be really challenging for some women. Personally, I found that a lot of people commented on how quickly I'd lost weight gained in pregnancy, and it acted as a reinforcement of the socially accepted thin ideal in my mind. I had not purposefully lost weight or engaged in any behaviours to encourage this, but I started to get anxious thinking about how I would maintain my body without reverting to restricting and purging that I had engaged in previously. So even when people think that they're making quite a positive comment, it can be, quite harmful to that person, dependent on their history. Sex drive can also be affected. So this may be due to the individual being self-conscious about their changing body, just physically uncomfortable, or they might be anxious, for example, about the effect on the baby, or they might just have symptoms such as morning sickness. So if you are a partner, it is important to understand that your loved one may not feel the same way they used to, and it's important not to take this personally. Some new parents struggle because they feel that they've lost their identity as an individual, as a person. They feel this identity has been replaced by their identity as a parent. And it can also mean the sudden loss of or changes to aspects of your life. So new parents, and especially mothers, might feel they've lost their professional identity, time for themselves, time to be with their partner and friends, confidence in how they look, or freedom. Another obvious consideration and challenge is fatigue and sleep deprivation. Both of these can occur during pregnancy and early parenthood and can be relentless. So many women have pregnancy insomnia and then go into new parenthood and have babies who need to be fed, changed and settled multiple times during the night, which prevents them from sleeping. So we all know that just one night with not enough sleep can play havoc with our well-being, but this relentlessness of sleep deprivation for expecting and new parents can be really challenging. And especially when you consider that it's just one element along with many other challenges. There's also changing nutritional needs and appetite to take into consideration, and these may differ dependent on the stage the woman is at or whether or not they're breastfeeding. They may also be impacted by nausea and cravings. So many women also feel tired, which might influence their food choices, generally taking them to more sugary, high-fat foods. If this is food they're not used to eating or that they tend to binge on, this can be challenging for them to make sense of within their own mind or be comfortable with. Again, using my own personal experience, I breastfed my baby and was constantly hungry. I was eating nearly twice what I would normally eat, but it clearly just wasn't enough. So I found that I had to work at allowing myself to be comfortable with that change to my appetite as a result of changing nutritional needs. Comorbid mental health conditions can also factor in, and we know that eating disorders are often experienced in conjunction with other mental health concerns, such as anxiety or depression. So it's important to consider how these may also affect the pregnant or new parent. So how can you support your loved one? Support can be provided in many ways, and it may be best to discuss how your support can be tailored to what your loved one needs. No two people are the same, and the support they may need may also change at different points. We will run through some key areas where you may be able to provide help during this period and outline some things that may be best avoided. So, appointment support. Women are highly engaged with the health system during pregnancy and early parenthood, so it provides a really good opportunity for support from professional care providers, but it often isn't as simple as this. Whilst depression and anxiety are now routinely screened for during this period, eating disorders or a woman's relationship with food and their body may not be discussed. Even when they are discussed, eating disorders often fly under the radar due to the shame and secrecy they evoke. Pregnant women and new parents may experience magnified feelings of guilt and shame over the potential for harm to their baby. They may also fear judgment from others or think that people perceive them as being selfish because they are still engaging in restricting, binging or purging, even when they understand it poses a risk to the fetus or that it may affect their breast milk. They may also fear that people will think they are not fit to be a parent. As a result, they may be reluctant to disclose their problem and in many cases may not even believe or admit to themselves that they have a problem. So you can play your part by encouraging them to discuss any issues or concerns they are having at their appointments. The more open and honest they are with their care providers, the more likely it is that they will be able to get the help they need and deserve. While some people may want your help in communicating to professionals, it's important that they have a voice and that the choice is theirs. Offer to support and provide input with their consent, but try not to speak on their behalf and take their voice away. So listening to them. It's important that you listen to your loved one. You can show that you are actively listening and understanding by summarising your loved one's concerns in your own words and showing your interest through facial expressions and posture. For example, you can make calm eye contact and offer soothing responses such as, "I'm trying to understand why you are feeling that way." Ask questions and try your best to understand and not judge at the same time. It's also really important to show compassion. It's also valuable that you go into this knowing that you don't need to have all of the answers. It's so much more important that you listen and give the person the space to discuss how they are feeling rather than becoming distracted as they talk by trying to think up solutions. After you've heard them out, you may want to go away and further educate yourself and gain a greater understanding, or you might develop some ways that you can work with them to identify triggers or certain thoughts or behaviours that they're having. But firstly, it's important to just listen. When they speak, try not to blame yourself for how they're feeling. Eating disorders are serious mental illnesses, and it's not your fault and not up to you to fix everything. In terms of what to avoid, try not to use labelling or blaming statements or judgmental language. Also, try not to demand change or berate the person. Yes, you may be frustrated or anxious, especially considering behaviours may impact on the fetus or baby, but it's really important that you stay calm. Dietary assistance. So there are a variety of eating disorders, from restrictive types such as anorexia to overeating such as binge eating disorder. Dependent on the individual and their diagnosis, experience and stage, it will be important to support them to have adequate nutrition that meets their needs. Nutrition during pregnancy and early parenthood can be confusing for many people who don't have eating disorders or a challenged relationship with food or their body, but can be even harder when someone does. Challenges can be further impacted by morning sickness, nausea, vomiting, cravings or food aversions. So when we talk about care in ED recovery, we talk about a triad of care as being gold standard. So this includes a GP, a psychologist or psychiatrist, and a dietitian. So it may be particularly helpful to get the professional support of a dietitian, especially if your loved one is unsure about what to eat, how much to eat, how to manage cravings and food aversions, and deal with morning sickness or nausea. You can then support your loved one in adhering to meal plans or advice provided. So in a practical sense, you may be able to assist with meal planning and shopping, ensuring there are a range of nutritious options available to them. Having your loved one well fed will leave them less likely to suffering cognitive changes and should help with more positive outcomes for the fetus or baby. And one thing to try and avoid is tricking or forcing the person to eat, or negative comments or judgments on their food choice. So I'll pass back to you, Rebecca.
Thanks, Olivia. So encouragement to exercise or to move. Now, there's many benefits to movement or exercise in pregnancy and early parenthood. That can be things like it reduces backache or constipation, bloating and swelling. It may help to prevent or treat gestational diabetes. It increases energy, it improves mood, improves posture, promotes muscle tone, strength and endurance, and it can also help to sleep, to help you to make you sleep better. It might not, exercise or movement mightn't be something that your loved one is motivated to do, or it may be something that they're engaging into an extreme level. It's important that movement is gentle and safe, dependent on the individual and the stage that they're at. You can support them and encourage them by making time to allow them the space to do exercise, particularly if there are other children or if they're working in paid work. You can do movement with them, going for a morning or an evening walk together. You could explore some perinatal or postnatal classes that might suit and encourage them to sign up and make time. If someone is less motivated, this could be quite helpful. You can encourage gentle exercise, things like yoga, which will help them to connect to their body and baby, but try and avoid making them feel guilty about movement or exercise. It can be hard, particularly if the person feels uncomfortable or exhausted or sick. Gentle encouragement and engaging in some form of movement with them will be more useful than trying to, label them with put on the good old guilt trip. So we talk a lot about self-care when we're talking about eating disorders and trying to make this a priority. So self-care includes any activity that someone does voluntarily which helps them to maintain their physical, mental or emotional health. It's so important for everyone, but you can see why it's important during pregnancy and early parenthood, and it should be an important part of your loved one's every day. It shouldn't be seen as a luxury. Sometimes people think of self-care as a luxury and they don't believe that they are deserving of it. So people can sometimes think they don't have time or leave themselves last during this period, that they're feeding the baby or they're looking after the toddler or they're balancing paid and unpaid work. So one of the things that can be really helpful is to keep a self-care diary, and you could encourage your loved one to do this or to write things down on a calendar so that they're doing it for themselves each day. Could be, things, encourage them to do things as simple as taking a nap when the baby sleeps, or if you're the partner, you could take the newborn for a morning walk and let your partner have a sleep in. You can provide them with time and space to exercise or book them a massage. You can make sure that they have time and space to catch up with a friend or go out for a coffee themselves. So whilst the wellness and self-care industry has really commercialised the idea of self-care, it doesn't need to be expensive or time-consuming. It's most effective if it's done daily, and it's simple activities like meditating or movement, sleep, reading, a little bit of time alone, socialising. All these things, are very low cost or they cost nothing, and they help to enhance health and well-being and to manage stress. The next one is to do with managing expectations, and this is a huge one, particularly for new parents. The disparity between what a new parent's expectations are and the new parent reality can be quite jarring. We live in a world where parenting is increasingly expected to look picture perfect, which is largely perpetuated through the media and social media and celebrity culture. But this is not the reality. Managing the expectations is a key component that will help your loved ones settle into their role as an expectant or new parent. It can be helpful for you to discuss how they expect things will be, and to be honest about the potential realities of the situation, showing that you understand that the reality might be messy and tough and will entail sleepless nights and baby food smeared on walls and a body that doesn't bounce back is really important. It might also be helpful to be aware that comparisons can be very harmful. Whether your loved one is comparing themselves to another parent in a parents group, or whether you're comparing yourself as parents to other parents, this can be stressful and can lead to very unattainable goals. What works or happens for someone else may not work or happen for you. And even if they say their baby sleeps for 12 hours a night, or if they seem to be really happy in all their Facebook posts, this is just what they're choosing to share. It may not be their reality either. So limiting the use of social media might help. This can be hard, but perhaps it's something that you want to focus on as a family, or you can discuss with your loved one what their expectations are about coming from, and try to minimise that damage. So really try and manage the expectation and minimise the damage. Practical assistance, I mean, these ones are fairly obvious if you can offer these things. Many parents or families may feel that they're limited in the assistance that they can offer, but there's always something that you can do to ease with the burden of pregnancy and early parenthood. You might organise a cleaner or organise childcare, or you might drop food off or be a bit of a gatekeeper to visitors in the early days so that your partner or loved one doesn't feel overwhelmed and exhausted as they settle into parenthood. Instead of asking the person whether you can cook a meal or babysit, just do it. This takes all the pressure off the expectant or new mother. They don't have to think about anything, but they can reap the benefits of the assistance. So sometimes it's just a case of actually doing it. Building resilience. Resilience is something that's, talked about a lot in our contemporary society, but often people don't quite know what it means. So when we're talking about resilience, we're talking about flexibility and inner strength so that you can bounce back when things don't go well. And parents who have tools for coping with stress and the occasional crisis have what we would call resilience. So you can help your parent or loved one to develop this so that they can cope with the stresses of life and can create a positive and supportive environment for their children. And this can be done by helping them to seek out connections. For example, encouraging the new parent to maybe go to a parent group, or perhaps going with them if they don't feel comfortable. This can lead to then good support systems and the building of positive relationships. These things make people feel better and they assist with building resilience. It's important that they understand that this period is often stressful, and many people will experience stresses. Even just becoming a parent is a huge life change, which is classifiable as a stressor. It's also important to help them nurture a positive self-view. How you communicate can affect this. Praise the loved one with the new child. Build their confidence. This is something new that they're doing, but demonstrate that you have confidence in their ability, and they will start to see this confidence in themselves. A positive attitude is important. There are times that are going to be hard, but persevering and having the attitude that will having the attitude that they will learn from their mistakes is important. Trying to avoid that kind of, if I'm not perfect, I've failed, the fear of failure that we often have in contemporary society. You can let them know that the positives in situations they may be viewing negatively. For example, they might be struggling to breastfeed in public and may give it a go, but stop. You could let them know that you're really proud of them and that you think it's really positive that they've tried in the first place. Routine can be helpful, as it can take out some of the stresses and unpredictability, and might help to keep things a little bit, a bit more control. But just so long as the routine doesn't become the new form of control. Try to avoid negativity, whether this is through negative comments or a poor attitude or things that can trigger a crisis of confidence. The person should understand that stress is a part of life, and that they have the strength to work through it rather than letting it beat them. Consistently communicate. I mean, this is one that we talk about a lot. Allowing time and space so that somebody can talk openly and honestly. And some of these things that I'm going to share with you now will seem quite basic, but sometimes when we're under stress, we forget what it's like. And so communication can be one of those things that goes right out the window. So some basic rules for good communication are things like perhaps only one person speaking at a time, trying to work at really understanding and listening to what the other person is saying. If talking isn't working, maybe you could try something else. Maybe you could try writing to each other, creating an atmosphere that's calm and compassionate and warm and respectful, so the person feels that it's okay to talk and okay to talk about stressful things. Remaining positive by referring to achievements and progress rather than finding all the faults in the situation. Some of these seem absolutely like common sense, but when we're put under pressure, often those things that are common sense go out the window. Often the tone of your voice or your non-verbal communication, it can be just as important how you sound to somebody, how you touch somebody, how you treat somebody. It's important to think about the way that we can communicate, as it can help you to stay calm and show your loved one that you understand their concerns. If your emotional tone is warm and accepting, this may promote change. So supporting healthy body image. So there's a few here that we want to look at. It's really important that you try and support a healthy body image during pregnancy and post-pregnancy. Being aware of the triggers of pregnancy, the incessant sort of counting, comparing and measuring that happens during those 9 months and beyond can tap into some some deep vulnerabilities that are linked to eating disorders and food and weight obsessions. Perfectionism, loss of control, feelings of isolation and memories of childhood often bubble right to the surface. But if you're aware of this, you can help your loved one to get the support that they need, and they'll have a better chance of weathering those storms without resorting to self-destructive habits. Resist the urge to shut down or close off. Encourage your loved one to remember that there's nothing shameful about asking for help. It's the most courageous thing that they can do for themselves and their baby. If they can look at their recovery as an ongoing process, they'll be able to reach their full potential as an individual and as a parent. And assist them to break the cycle of body hatred. Reiterate the message that your loved one's body is working some serious magic right now. Try and encourage the expectant or new parent to appreciate their body. It can be helpful to ask them how they want their own child to feel about their body. They'll probably want to teach their child to appreciate their body for what it can do rather than how it looks. Then you can ask them to take their own advice on board. We have the power to help future generations grow up placing a higher value on good health rather than on weight and physical appearance. But before we pass along these positive attitudes, we first must embrace them for ourselves. It's really important to remember that carers are part of the solution, not the problem. Don't forget this, that you're part of the solution and not the problem. So let's look at a few tips and hints. It's really important that you try and avoid comments about appearance, weight or food. Try and avoid saying things about how somebody looks, that they're a yummy mummy, that there are other mothers who are looking thin, slim, healthier, better. Try to avoid naming other people who are also worried, demanding change from the person, berating the person, giving them a hard time about what's going on. Try and remain open and compassionate. Power struggles in relation to food and eating and meal times, tricking or forcing the person to eat, or using, labelling statements or blaming statements or judgmental language. It's try and avoid those things. Try and think about those things before you speak. So your role as a carer may change over the course of the support that you provide. Following on from this webinar, it might be sensible to speak to your loved one and find out what they think is going to be helpful or what they find is helpful. Remember that you don't have to be everything to support your person. In fact, you can't. You need to pick your battles or pick the issues that you want to address and manage and address what you can. Lean on others to support you and take on other battles as needed. You don't need to strive for perfection in your role as a carer. You may make mistakes, you may not communicate clearly, you may let emotions get in the way, or you might get frustrated. Be kind to yourself and be honest with yourself and your loved one.
Thanks.
Professional. Oh, thanks, Liv.
So I'm conscious that we've gone a little bit over time, but I just wanted to introduce you to these slides and to show you that there are, options for professional support. We've also got some key support options listed out here, and it's important to know that there are support options available, whether you or your loved one are at the start, in the middle, or well on the way to recovery. So seeking help and support early is significant in aiding recovery. And whilst the system can be difficult to navigate, there is definitely help available. So we've also just got some options for carer support groups and some useful eating disorder and carer resources. Also got some that are perinatal specific. And then we'll just leave you with our EDV services. So this is for Victoria only. We're more than happy to take any of your inquiries. Thank you very much for listening in today. We hope that you've got something out of it, and we wish you all the best in your journey. Thank you.
Thank you.